country, well, there often comes a point where you might start thinking about putting down even deeper roots, maybe even considering becoming a citizen. If that thought has ever crossed your mind here in Germany, especially in Berlin, then you're definitely in the right place today. We're taking a deep dive into what exactly that involves. Our guide for this is the comprehensive information on applying for German citizenship, or Einbürgerung, provided by the service portal Berlin.
Exactly. The path to citizenship, yeah, it can sometimes feel like a bit of a maze, can't it? So our goal today is really to be your expert guide, sort of helping you understand the most important bits. We'll be focusing on the core requirements, what you need to meet, and the specific documents you'll need to gather. Think of it as getting the essential info without getting totally lost in the bureaucratic details.
Perfect. So before we get into the real nitty-gritty, just a quick heads up. If you happen to have submitted a citizenship application in Berlin before January 1st, 2024, to your local district office, it's really worth checking in on that first. The Landesamt für Einwanderung, or LEA, that's the state office for immigration, often just called LEA, is now handling those existing cases, so, a new application might not actually be needed.
That's a really smart first step.
Yeah.
Absolutely no need to start from scratch if you're already in the system. And building on that idea of, efficiency, the Service Portal Berlin really encourages you to use their quick check tool right at the beginning, before you even start the formal application.
Okay, the quick check. What's the thinking behind that? Why is that so important?
Well, what's kind of fascinating here is how proactive they are in recommending this. The quick check gives you an initial assessment, sort of a snapshot, of whether you're likely to meet the basic requirements for citizenship. It's a really sensible way to see if you're, on the right track before investing a whole lot of time and effort into the full application. Why go through all the paperwork if you don't yet meet a fundamental criterion, right?
Yeah, that makes total sense. Avoid wasted effort. Now, what if you're looking to apply as a family? Are there any special considerations there?
Yes, there are. For children under 16, it's generally simpler. They can usually be included in the online application of a parent who has custody. That makes it a bit easier. However, and this is important to know, spouses or registered partners, and also children who are 16 or older, they will each need to submit their own individual applications. So yeah, it's not necessarily a single application covers everyone in the family.
Good to know. So, okay, you've done the quick check, you understand the family application rules. What's the next really crucial step before actually diving into the online application itself?
The LEA really stresses the importance, really hammers it home, of thoroughly verifying that you meet all the prerequisites before you even start filling out the online forms. This includes making absolutely sure you have all the necessary documents and evidence readily available. And it's also vital to prepare digital copies of everything, scanning documents, taking clear photos, that sort of thing, because you'll need to upload these as part of the online process.
Right, digital is the way to go then. And given the amount of information that's likely required, sounds like it could be a long process.
Yes, exactly. The Service Portal Berlin itself notes that the online application is quite comprehensive. So don't feel like you absolutely have to complete it all in one sitting. The system allows you to save your progress at any point and come back to it later, which is honestly a really helpful feature when you're dealing with such a detailed process like this one.
Okay, that's good. So you're prepped, you've got your digital documents ready, you're ready to tackle the online application. Can you walk us through what that actually entails? What does it look like?
Sure. So the main part is submitting the application through their online portal. As you go through the different sections, it'll prompt you to upload those digital copies of your supporting documents we just talked about.
Yeah.
Oh, and keep in mind the accepted file formats. It's PDF, JPG, JPEG, and PNG. And there are also size limits. The total size of all your uploaded files can't be more than 100 megabytes, and each individual file has a 7 megabyte limit. So you might need to resize things.
File formats and sizes. Okay, good technical details to be aware of. Now, when does the payment part come in, the fees?
Yes, the fees. The processing fee has to be paid before you can actually submit the online application. You do it right at the end of the online process. And this is a really important point. This fee is non-refundable, even if your application is ultimately denied. So yeah, it really reinforces the value of using that quick check beforehand to get a better sense of your eligibility.
Definitely something to keep in mind. Okay, so you've paid, you've uploaded everything, you've hit that submit button. What happens next? What's the immediate result?
Right. So once you've successfully submitted, you'll immediately get a confirmation, usually in PDF format. The LEA advises you to save this document carefully and ideally print it out for your records as well. It's also really important to understand that submitting the application at this stage doesn't actually change your current residency status in Germany. You're still in the same legal standing as you were before applying. It doesn't grant you any new rights immediately.
Right, it's just kicking off the process.
Yeah.
So what are the subsequent steps then after this online submission? What does the LEA do?
Well, the LEA will then begin reviewing your application. This involves a pretty thorough check of all the information you've provided and, of course, the documents you've uploaded. They might get in touch with you if they need any further documents, maybe something wasn't clear, or if anything needs clarification. Eventually, if your application progresses positively, you'll likely receive an invitation for an in-person appointment. However, and this is a big caveat right now, the LEA does caution that they are currently dealing with a huge volume of applications. Remember those roughly 40,000 cases they took over from the districts at the start of 2024? So there might be some longer waiting times for this appointment. Patience will likely be, well, very important here.
Patience indeed. Sounds like it. Now, okay, let's really focus on the core of this. The actual requirements you absolutely must meet to be eligible for German citizenship in Berlin. Let's break those down, maybe one by one.
Absolutely. So, the first fundamental requirement is that Berlin must be your primary residence, your main place of living. You need to be registered here and actually living here, making it the center of your life, basically. Secondly, there's the duration of your legal and continuous residency in Germany. The standard period, the baseline, is generally 5 years.
5 years? Okay, that's a significant chunk of time, but I think I remember reading there are exceptions to that 5-year rule, aren't there?
Absolutely, yes. The residency requirement can be reduced down to 3 years if you can demonstrate what they call special integration achievements. Now, what does that mean? Well, it could include things like exceptional academic performance, maybe outstanding vocational or professional achievements. Think perhaps publishing significant research in your field, or achieving really notable success in your career that has a wider impact. It can also include significant civic engagement, like maybe extensive long-term volunteer work in a local organization. Along with this shorter 3-year residency, you'd also need to prove that you can financially support yourself without relying on public funds, and have German language skills at the C1 level that's quite advanced proficiency. This really reflects Germany's interest in recognizing individuals who are actively contributing to society beyond just, living here.
C1 level German and special achievements. That sounds like quite a high bar. Are there other ways that 5-year mark can be shortened? Maybe something more common?
Yes, there's another scenario for a 3-year residency requirement. This applies if you've been married to or in a registered partnership with a German citizen for at least 2 years, and you meet the other conditions, of course. Additionally, as we touched on briefly earlier, if your spouse, registered partner, or even your children are also applying for citizenship at the same time as you, they might be eligible for shorter residency periods too. The quick check tool we mentioned can provide more specific guidance on those family-based situations.
Okay, so it really depends heavily on the individual circumstances and sort of their level of integration or family ties.
Okay.
What's the next key requirement on the list after residency?
You need to have a clear identity and nationality. This typically requires you to present a valid national passport or a national ID card from your country of origin, your home country's documents. And it's important to note here that German travel documents issued to foreigners, like Reiseausweis für Ausländer, travel document for foreigners, are usually not considered sufficient proof of your original nationality for this specific purpose. They need to confirm where you are actually a citizen of.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. They need proof of your original citizenship. Another really important one I know, and it's quite significant, is the commitment to the German basic law, the Grundgesetz.
Yes, this is absolutely fundamental. You need to explicitly declare your commitment to the principles laid out in the German basic law, the Grundgesetz. This isn't just a formality, it also includes a clear rejection of any extremist or terrorist activities, and you must unequivocally state that anti-Semitic, racist, or other dehumanizing acts are totally incompatible with the human dignity guaranteed by the Grundgesetz, and that they violate Germany's free democratic basic order. This emphasis really stems from Germany's historical experience, obviously, and the fundamental values enshrined in its constitution to prevent a recurrence of past atrocities and ensure a democratic society going forward.
It's a very clear and strong statement about the core values expected in German society. And I believe it also touches on Germany's historical responsibility, doesn't it?
It does, very explicitly. Applicants are required to acknowledge Germany's special historical responsibility for the crimes of the Nazi regime and its terrible consequences. This explicitly includes the commitment to the protection of Jewish life, the pursuit of peaceful international relations, and the absolute prohibition of waging aggressive warfare. It's a core part of the understanding of modern Germany.
Well, these are significant commitments, yeah, that every applicant really needs to understand and genuinely agree to. Now, let's talk about your current legal status in Germany. What kind of residency permit do you actually need to hold to be eligible? Is any permit okay?
No, not just any permit. You need to hold one of a specific list of residence titles. This includes the Niederlassungserlaubnis, which is essentially a permanent settlement permit, also the Erlaubnis zum Daueraufenthalt EU, which is a long-term residence permit recognized across the European Union, and certain types of Aufenthaltserlaubnis, which is a general term for a residence permit. However, and this is really crucial, some specific types of Aufenthaltserlaubnis listed under certain paragraphs of the Aufenthaltsgesetz Residence Act are not sufficient for citizenship. These often relate to temporary stays for specific purposes, like studying Section B, vocational training, Section C&A, or maybe seeking temporary protection, Section 24, Section 25, Paragraph 344B5. These don't typically fulfill the criteria for long-term integration needed for citizenship. You can find the detailed list of which permits qualify and which don't on the Service Portal Berlin website. It's definitely worth checking carefully. Also accepted are the Aufenthaltskarte or Daueraufenthaltskarte for family members of EU citizens, the Aufenthaltsdokument GB, related to Brexit withdrawal agreement, the Aufenthaltserlaubnis Schweiz for Swiss citizens, or if you are already a citizen of an EU or EEA country, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, or Switzerland yourself.
Okay, so it's definitely not just any residency permit that qualifies you. That's a key detail. What about the financial side? Being able to support yourself?
Generally, yes. You and your family, if they depend on you, should not be receiving Bürgergeld, citizens allowance, or Sozialhilfe, social welfare, basically state welfare benefits. However, there are some important exceptions to this rule. One key exception is for individuals belonging to the so-called guest worker generation. These are people who came to West Germany for employment based on recruitment agreements up until June 30, 1974, or who came to East Germany as contract workers up until June 13, 1990. This acknowledges the significant contributions they made to the country over decades.
That's a really important recognition of their specific history and contribution here. Are there other exceptions related to financial support, perhaps more recent ones?
Yes, there are. The requirement of not receiving Bürgergeld or Sozialhilfe is also waived if you are currently in full-time employment and have been for at least 20 out of the last 24 months. So basically, mostly employed for the last 2 years. Another exception applies if you live in a family unit like with a spouse or registered partner who is in full-time employment, and you have a minor child together. The focus here seems to be on demonstrating a sustainable ability to contribute economically, either yourself or within the immediate family unit.
So that makes sense, looking at the overall household stability. Now, what about any involvement with the legal system? Do you need a completely clean criminal record?
Yes. Essentially, you should have no significant criminal record. This means you should not have been sentenced by a court to a monetary penalty exceeding 90 daily fines, or a custodial sentence exceeding 3 months where you were given probation. Importantly, though, even lesser sentences can be problematic if the crime was motivated by anti-Semitic, racist, xenophobic, or other dehumanizing reasons. This goes against those fundamental values we discussed earlier. Furthermore, if there is an ongoing criminal investigation against you for a potential felony, your citizenship application cannot be processed until that investigation is fully resolved one way or another.
Okay, a very clear emphasis on respecting and upholding the law. Now let's move on to something that's often a key aspect of integration people think about. German language skills. What's the requirement there?
Right. In most cases, you need to demonstrate sufficient German language skills. Generally, this means at least the B1 level of the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, the CEFR. B1 level means you should be able to understand the main points of clear standard input on familiar matters, things you encounter regularly in work, school, leisure, etc. And you should be able to deal with most situations likely to arise while traveling in a German-speaking area. You can handle everyday conversations. However, for members of the guest worker generation, there's that exception again. It is sufficient if they can communicate orally in German without any significant problems in their daily lives. This acknowledges that their integration might have occurred primarily through practical experience over many years, not formal language courses.
So a more practical, informal assessment for that specific group, recognizing their unique history. But for the vast majority of applicants, it's a recognized B1 level certificate or higher, yeah.
Correct.
And it's not just about speaking German, is it? You also need to understand the basics of how German society functions, the legal system, and so on.
Exactly. You need to demonstrate knowledge of the German legal and social system and sort of how people coexist in Germany. You can prove this in several ways. The most common way is probably by passing the Einbürgerungstest, which is a specific citizenship test covering topics like German history, politics, and societal values. Or alternatively, by holding the Leben in Deutschland, living in Germany, certificate, which you often get after completing an integration course and passing the test at the end. It covers very similar topics.
Okay, so those are specific tests designed to assess that civic knowledge. Are there other ways you can demonstrate this understanding, maybe through education?
Yes, definitely. You can also fulfill this requirement if you successfully attended a German general education school for 4 years and achieved satisfactory grades, meaning you were promoted to the next grade each year with at least an ausreichend, which is like a D or pass grade, in your last school report for those years. Also, simply achieving promotion, for that song, to the 10th grade of a German general education school also counts. Additionally, obtaining a German vocational training qualification, like an Ausbildung, or an equivalent qualification, or successfully completing a degree program at a German higher education institution, like a university or Fachhochschule, will also satisfy this requirement. Your German education proves you've absorbed this knowledge. And again, just to reiterate, members of the guest worker generation are exempt from having to provide this specific proof of civic knowledge.
Right, so your educational background within Germany can definitely be a pathway to demonstrating this knowledge. That's good to know. 2 more requirements on the list that seem quite specific, related to marriage and gender equality.
That's right. Firstly, you must not be married to multiple spouses simultaneously. Polygamy is not recognized under German law, so you can only have one spouse at a time. Furthermore, through your behavior and actions, you need to demonstrate respect for the equality of men and women as it's enshrined in the basic law. This is a fundamental principle of German society.
Okay, these really underscore the fundamental social values upheld in Germany. Now, the Service Portal Berlin does mention that exceptions to some of these requirements might be possible in individual cases. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, that's an important point for people to keep in mind. Exceptions can be considered, particularly in cases of physical, mental, or psychological illness or disability, or for age-related reasons. Also, exceptions might be considered if strict adherence to a particular requirement would lead to what is termed undue hardship, unzumutbare harte, for the applicant. Each case like this is assessed individually based on its specific circumstances. For example, someone facing a severe, long-term debilitating illness might have certain requirements, perhaps like the employment or language level, adjusted or waived, depending on the situation.
So there is some flexibility for very specific, difficult circumstances. And finally, for families applying with children, there's a specific point about parental custody that seems important.
Yes. For children under the age of 16 who are under the joint custody of both parents, a signed consent form, Einverständniserklärung, from both parents is necessary for the child to be included in a citizenship application, or to apply. The online application itself can be filled out and submitted by only one parent, but the documented signed consent of the other parent needs to be provided and uploaded with the application. There's usually a specific form for this. Of course, if one parent has sole custody, then naturally the consent of the other parent is not required, but you'd need to provide proof of sole custody.
Oh, okay, wow, that covers the rather extensive list of requirements. Phew. Now, let's move on to what can often feel like the most overwhelming part for many people, actually gathering all the necessary documents. This list looks quite detailed as well, so maybe we can go through the key ones.
It's definitely comprehensive, yeah. And having everything in order right from the start can really help avoid delays in the process later on. So the very first document you'll technically need is a completed online application itself, and along with that, the PDF confirmation that you receive right after you've submitted it online. Keep that safe.
Right, that confirmation acts as your initial proof that you've officially started the application. Makes sense. What other absolutely essential documents are on the list?
Okay, next up, a valid passport or national ID card. This is absolutely essential to prove your identity and your current nationality, as we discussed under requirements. Following that, you'll need to provide personal status documents, but only if they apply to your situation, of course. This includes things like your marriage certificate, if you're married, a legally binding divorce decree, if you're divorced, or perhaps an adoption decree, along with official confirmation that the adoption is legally valid in Germany, if that applies to you or your children.
Got it. These are the core documents that establish who you are and your basic family situation. Now, what about demonstrating your financial circumstances? I see this is broken down depending on whether you're employed, self-employed, etc.
That's right, it varies. For those who are employed, you'll generally need to provide a copy of your current employment contract, your salary statements, Gehaltsabrechnung, for the last 6 months, and crucially, a formal confirmation from your employer stating that your employment relationship is ongoing and has not been terminated. Arbeitgeberbescheinigung über ein ungekündigtes Arbeitsverhältnis. If your net salary statements aren't issued on a strict monthly basis for some reason, you'll need to provide the most recent net salary statement you have, plus bank statements showing your salary deposits for the last 6 consecutive months. This gives them a clear picture of your current employment and recent income history.
Okay, so really solid proof of your current employment situation. What about individuals who are self-employed or freelancers? That sounds like it might be more complex.
Yeah, for self-employed individuals or freelancers, the document requirements are definitely a bit more involved, as you'd expect. You'll need to submit your latest income tax assessment notice, Einkommensteuerbescheid, from the Finanzamt tax office. You'll also need a completed Prüfungsbericht form. This is a specific audit report form provided by the LEA, along with all the necessary attachments listed on it. And this form needs to be officially filled out, signed, and stamped by a registered tax advisor, Steuerberater, an auditor, Wirtschaftsprüfer, or a certified tax agent, Steuerbevollmächtiger. You can't just fill it out yourself. Additionally, you'll need a recent tax clearance certificate, Bescheinigung your Steuerslagen, directly from the Finanzamt, basically showing you don't owe taxes. And then, depending on your specific business structure, either a current commercial register excerpt, or your business registration certificate, Gewerbenmeldung, if you're registered as a business, Gewerbetreibender. Or, if you're registered as a freelancer, Freiberufler, you'll need proof of your freelance registration with the Finanzamt, and potentially proof of membership in the relevant professional chamber, Kammer, like for doctors or lawyers. It's absolutely crucial for self-employed applicants to ensure their tax affairs are fully documented and in order.
Wow, okay. It really sounds like self-employed applicants need to have a very organized financial and tax record ready to go, maybe even get their tax advisor involved early. What about those who are currently not employed for various reasons?
Right. For individuals who are not currently employed, you'll need to provide evidence of your current financial situation and means of support. This could include a notification of entitlement for unemployment benefit Bescheid über Arbeitslosengeld your most recent pension statement, Rentenbescheid, if you're receiving a pension, proof of any significant assets you may possess, like bank statements showing savings or investment portfolio summaries, a notification confirming receipt of Bürgergeld or Sozialhilfe, though remember, generally receiving these disqualifies you unless one of those specific exceptions we talked about applies, like guest worker generation, or a recent full-time work history, or partner working full-time with a child, or notifications regarding BAföG, federal training assistance, or vocational training allowance, Berufsausbildungsbelufs, if you're a student or trainee receiving support, and also proof of any regular maintenance payments, Unterhaltszahlung, you receive, maybe from an ex-spouse. The goal here is really just to provide a comprehensive overview of how you are currently financially supported if you're not employed.
Okay, so a complete picture, whatever your source of income or support is. The list also specifically mentions providing proof of other benefits you might receive.
Yes, depending on your individual circumstances, the online application will likely prompt you to upload proof of any other relevant social benefits you or your family might be receiving. This could include things like Elterngeld, parental allowance, Kindergeld, the standard child benefit, Wohngeld, housing benefit, Kinderzuschlag, child supplement for low-income families, maybe an orphan's pension, Waisenrente, Einstiegsgeld, an integration grant sometimes given alongside Bürgergeld when starting work, or formal proof like court orders or bank statements of any alimony payments, Unterhalt, you're receiving. Basically anything that contributes to your financial picture.
Right, so any financial support that contributes to your or your family's well-being needs to be documented. What about students and trainees specifically? What kind of documentation do they need beyond potential BAföG notices?
Students and trainees will need to provide a current school certificate, Schulbescheinigung, training certificate, Ausbildungsbescheinigung, or enrollment certificate, Immatrikulationsbescheinigung, from their respective educational institution, proving they are currently enrolled. If they are in vocational training, Ausbildung, they will also need to provide their training contract, Ausbildungsvertrag. For track. And importantly, for both students and trainees, they generally need to provide all their relevant school or vocational school transcripts, Zeugnis received so far in Germany.
Okay, proof of their current educational status and their academic or training history. Got it. Then there's the really important aspect of health insurance coverage. What's needed there?
Absolutely vital. For those who are covered by statutory health insurance, gesetzliche Krankenversicherung, which is most people, you'll need to provide a copy of your electronic health insurance card, elektronische Gesundheitskarte, the one with your photo on it, along with a current confirmation of your insurance coverage, aktuelle Versicherungsbescheinigung, from your provider. You usually just request this from your Krankenkasse. If you happen to have private health and long-term care insurance, private Kranken- und Pflegeversicherung, you'll need to provide proof that you have been consistently paying your contributions, such as bank statements showing the regular payments, and also a current confirmation of your insurance coverage from the private insurer. This is crucial to demonstrate you have adequate health coverage, which is mandatory in Germany.
Essential for living here, absolutely. What about proving where you actually live in Berlin?
For that, you'll need to provide a copy of your current lease agreement, Mietvertrag, if you're renting. Along with that, you need recent proof of your rent payments, usually bank statements showing the rent going out for the last few months. If you own your property, instead of a lease, you'll need to provide a recent land registry excerpt, Grundbuchauszug, proving your ownership. This confirms your primary residence is indeed in Berlin.
Okay, lease or ownership proof. Now, we talked earlier about needing to demonstrate German language skills, typically B1. What kind of official documentation is required for that specific requirement?
Right. The Service Portal Berlin outlines several accepted forms of proof for your German language skills. The most straightforward is usually an official German language certificate, like from Goethe-Institut, TELC, or TestF, showing you've passed at least the B1 level of the GER, CEFR. Alternatively, it can be a school-leaving certificate, at least Hauptschulabschluss, which is typically after 9th or 10th grade, from a German school where German was a subject, and you received a minimum grade of ausreichend, sufficient, or a 4 in German in your final year there. Also, successfully completing German language vocational training, Berufsausbildung, in Germany, or obtaining a degree from a German language program at a recognized German higher education institution, university, etc., also serves as sufficient proof of B1 or higher language skills.
So, recognized qualifications and official certificates are really the key here. And it sounds like it's a similar approach for demonstrating your knowledge of the German legal and social system, the Einbürgerungstest stuff.
Exactly. Very similar ways to prove it. Proof of this civic knowledge can be provided by submitting the certificate you receive after successfully passing the Einbürgerungstest, or the Leben in Deutschland test, which, again, is often part of the integration course. Alternatively, you can use evidence of having successfully attended a German general education school for at least 4 years with satisfactory grades throughout, or simply achieving promotion, Versetzung, to the 10th grade of such a school, or again obtaining a German vocational training certificate, Abschlusszeugnis der Berufsausbildung, or an equivalent qualification, or completing a degree at a German higher education institution. As you can see, there's quite a bit of overlap. A German university degree, for example, can often satisfy both the language and the civic knowledge requirements simultaneously.
Yeah, it really seems like integrating successfully into the German education or vocational training system can really streamline some of these documentary requirements later on. What are maybe a couple of other final documents on the list we should mention?
Okay, 2 more key ones. You'll definitely need to provide your current Meldebestätigung, which is the official confirmation of your current address registration in Berlin. It should be relatively recent. And, as we discussed earlier regarding families, for children under 16 who are under the joint custody of both parents, you will absolutely need to upload that signed consent form, Einverständniserklärung, from the other parent who shares custody, giving their permission for the child's naturalization.
Phew. That is quite a comprehensive list of documents indeed. And I see a little note here that even after all that, additional documents might still be needed depending on the specific case.
That's correct. It's impossible to cover every single potential situation. The LEA will review your application and the initial set of documents you provide, and they will definitely inform you during the processing if they require any further documents or information that are specific to your individual situation. It's always best to provide everything clearly and honestly up front, but yeah, be prepared, they might ask for more later.
Okay, so we've covered the pretty extensive list of requirements and the equally extensive, maybe even more daunting list of necessary documents. It's crystal clear that thorough preparation is absolutely key to hopefully having a smooth application process.
Absolutely. Understanding these requirements in detail and getting all your documents meticulously gathered and organized is probably the most significant part of the work involved in applying for German citizenship. It takes time and effort.
Definitely. Now, before we wrap up, let's quickly touch on the practicalities, forms, and fees. Are there specific forms mentioned besides the main application?
Yes, the service portal website specifically mentions the availability of that Prüfungsbericht form for self-employed individuals, the one the tax advisor needs to fill out. They also often provide a sample consent form, Musterverlage Einverstandenerklärung, for joint custody situations, which can be helpful. You'd find these linked on the relevant service page.
And the cost. What are the fees involved?
The standard fee for the naturalization application is 255.00 EUR per person. However, for minor children under 16 who are applying together with at least one custodial parent, the fee is reduced to 51.00 EUR for the child. It's also worth reminding listeners that there might be additional costs involved later, specifically for the renunciation of their previous citizenship, if that's required in their case, though Germany now allows dual citizenship much more broadly. Those costs depend entirely on the regulations and fees of their home country's consulate or embassy, so that's something to check separately.
Right. The potential cost of giving up the old passport. And you mentioned the German fee is payable before submission. How do you pay that online?
Yes, payable before you can hit the final submit button on the online application. The payment is usually made via credit card, Visa, MasterCard, or PayPal during the online process itself. And just to reiterate that important point, if your application is rejected after processing, the full fee is still payable and non-refundable. If you decide to withdraw your application after substantive processing has already begun, the fee might be reduced, often to half, but you won't get it all back.
Good to know about withdrawals, too. Okay, briefly, what's the legal basis for all this, and what about processing times? People always want to know how long it takes.
The main legal foundations are found in the German Citizenship Act, the Staatsangehörigkeitsgesetz, often abbreviated as STAG. Specifically, sections 8, 9, and 10, paragraph 1 are most relevant for the types of naturalization based on residency and integration that we've discussed. As for processing time, well, the LEA is currently advising that longer processing times are expected. This is largely due to them taking over that massive backlog of approximately 40,000 pending cases from the Berlin district offices, Bezirksämter, as of January 1st, 2024. They explicitly request that applicants refrain from making status inquiries, as this can further slow things down. So again, patience is key.
Patience and avoiding constant calls, noted. If people need more official information or need to contact the LEA, where should they look?
The primary source is definitely the website of the Landesamt für Einwanderung, LEA Berlin itself. They have detailed pages on naturalization. The site also links to helpful resources like explanations of the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, RUSI 4 levels, and the service page for requesting that tax clearance certificate, Bescheinigung in Steuersachen, from the Finanzamt. For contact, the LEA's main location relevant for naturalization is often Sellerstrasse 16 13353 Berlin, though their postal address is listed as Friedrich-Karl-Sufer 24 13353 Berlin. They have a central phone number 030-90-269-4000 and a contact form on their website. No fax number seems to be listed anymore. They also note accessibility information. There's a ramp to the ground floor foyer and an elevator is available inside. And for general administrative questions, people can always try the Berlin-wide Burger telephone service at number 115.
Excellent practical details there. So, to quickly summarize our deep dive today, we've seen the importance of doing that initial quick check. We've walked through the online application process, including the fee payment, and we've spent a lot of time detailing the core requirements, things like residency duration, 5-year standard, 3 years possible, financial stability, B1 German language skills, knowledge of German society, and that crucial commitment to the basic law, Grundgesetz. And of course, we waded through that extensive list of required documents, from passports and certificates to detailed financial records and proof of insurance and residency.
Absolutely. This information should provide a really solid foundation for anyone in Berlin considering the path to German citizenship. It highlights the need for preparation, documentation, and understanding the principles involved.
Definitely. And maybe a final thought for our listeners to mull over. Considering all these detailed requirements, especially the emphasis on integration, language, civic knowledge, and that explicit commitment to the Grundgesetz and Germany's historical responsibility, what does becoming a citizen truly signify beyond just getting a new passport? What does it mean on a personal level and perhaps even on a societal level to take that step in today's Germany? Something to think about. Thanks again for joining us.